Cesar, are you ready? All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Board of Occupational Therapy meeting to order. This is day 2 of a 2-day meeting, Thursday, October 25th, 2018. Welcome, everyone. I am Richard Bookwalter, the president of the board. Thanks, everyone on the board, for being here. I'd like to ask for order to be called.
Okay. We'll do a roll call. Well, yeah, thank you. I get the word. Sharon?
Here.
Beata?
Here.
Denise is not here. Laura's here. Jeff?
Here.
Richard?
Here. We have a quorum. Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce our staff and give the public an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Reza Pejuhash, appearing as board counsel.
Heather Martin, Executive Officer.
Jody Posada, board staff.
Jeff Hampton. And we have Cesar Victoria behind the camera. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And, I'd like, in the audience, we have 2 persons here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. It's not obligatory, but if you'd like to.
Sabrina McCarley, Chair of Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Occupational Therapy Association of California.
And Chuck Wilmarth, Associate Chief Officer for Health Policy and State Affairs with the American Occupational Therapy Association.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Actually, that was item 20, and I forgot in 19 that I wanted to talk about the order of the agenda, because there are a couple of things that we carried over from yesterday that we weren't able to get to and needed to talk about today, and I just wanted to insert them into today's agenda so that you have the order of business. So item 11 is the first item that we're going to carry over legislative items for future meeting. That was from yesterday. We'd like to put that between 21 and 22. So it'll be 21, 11, 22. And then after 22, we'd like to put item 14, which is the discussion and possible action on moving the board's office between 22 and 23. So it's 22. So it'll be 21, 11, 22, 14, 23. And then items 15 and 16, which we also carried over, we're going to put between 25 and 26, the last just before the election of officers. Any questions or concerns about that order of business from the board?
As long as you've got it, Mr. President, we are fine.
Great. All right. So we are in, very good. So we have completed 19 and 20. We're at 21. Oh, that's right, 20. Oh, that's right, public comment. Do we have any public comment from the members of the audience for items not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move to item 21, report on action taken, if any, following the annual evaluation of the board's executive officer conducted during the board's closed session on October 24th, 2018. I did meet yesterday with our executive officer and present the findings from our performance evaluation yesterday in closed session. So thank you. I think that went fine. And I did talk to Karen Nelson this morning briefly about the follow-up that we discussed at the closed session. I don't know if more. We are, our strong desire is for Heather to continue with us for another year. And we think she's doing an outstanding job, and very much look forward to having her guide us through the next year.
Woohoo! Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. One of our, Denise Miller has arrived, so she's able to join us. What do we do when someone joins in progress? Do we take roll again, or do we simply add her?
We'll just note.
Just note the arrival
Yeah.
of Denise Miller. Thanks. I'm glad you could make it. I heard there was an accident on. I heard about some accidents on the road this morning.
She brought Portos.
Well,
That I got at 6 a.m., but when they opened.
thank you. That's very sweet of you.
Something
Thank
going
you.
on today.
Just to bring Denise, just to bring you up to date, we've just
don't have to.
started, and I've just announced that we're retaining Heather Martin for the next.
If she'll have us, you're
Yeah.
having us, right?
I'm having you.
Woo,
Super Fox.
all right,
Thank you.
serious.
Can I just say that we so appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much.
Little hearts, can you see the hearts flying?
I don't really. Okay.
What's the next one?
Okay, the end.
Well, I mean, I would like to make a note about that too. As I happen to be privileged to be on some other committees and with the state of California, and by far the way this staff and our executive officer supports the work we're expected to do has been fantastic. So, and is far above the rest. So, thank you.
We tried.
Thank you. So I understand from Heather that one of the persons who Ivan Altamora wanted to be here for item 11, and he's not here, and this is the time I was going to see him. Do we?
So Ivan, his plane got taken back from Sacramento. It is now in Oakland. They can't land any flights in Burbank right now. He
It's very foggy.
Does the
yeah.
fall?
So
Geez, we can't drive, we can't fly.
Wow.
so we can speak to it. We can.
So okay, so we'll just move forward with item 11 at this time.
Well, that was for the future legislation. I believe he wanted to touch base on AB 2221 and AB 2386 during the public comment session. Did you, because
Are you able to
if
speak
you
on
wanted to use that opportunity to discuss those bills, or I can report what I believe he was looking for. What have,
I think we definitely want to address 2221, and then we want to talk about
Do you want?
So we start that conversation.
Okay, so let's go back to public comment then, if we're doing that, to items not on the agenda,
Right.
since that kind of is. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought there was on the agenda.
Well, no, on the agenda is future legislative items for future meeting, not past, not legislation that's passed.
Okay, so, all right, that's fine.
Sorry.
So should I come up?
Yes, please. So we'll conclude this under item 20. It's fine.
So again, Chuck Wilmarth with the American Occupational Therapy Association. Appreciate the time to address the board today. And as you heard yesterday, Assembly 221 was signed by the governor into law, and that bill revises the California Occupational Therapy Practice Act, and it becomes effective January 1, 2019. And so the conversation that AOTA and OTAC wanted to bring up was starting a conversation about what needs to be done to fully implement the law. From our perspective, I think there are some things the board needs to consider. We are, and Sabrina can also address this, I believe we're receiving questions from our members about, particularly around advanced practices. Now that the word post-professional has been deleted, what does that mean? How does that change the process going forward? From my quick review of the board and the applications for advanced practices, the forms have post-professional throughout. So, I mean, it seems to me that those forms would have to be changed, perhaps some sort of FAQs about, what does this mean and going forward. So that's one piece. The next area is there is a new definition of continuing competence that has been added to the statute. What does that mean for the existing regulations related to continuing competence requirements? And I think that's just taking a closer look at what the board wants to do going forward about potentially revising regulations to implement that. So that's another area. I think that some of the provisions are self-implementing. There's some clarification language around supervision and aids. I don't know if there's FAQs on your website about either of those issues, but perhaps we're looking at some of the FAQs to see if there are any updates that need to be made there. I think we do want to also talk about advanced practices. We had to have a conversation as the legislation was going through the process about, we dropped our suggestion around a, affidavit or some sort of attestation, that's the word. And I think one of the things we'd like to have a conversation about is, given that the accreditation standards for occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants have evolved, should we revisit advanced practices in terms of the requirements, in terms of the didactic and experiential requirements. Could some of that be satisfied at the entry level? And I should clarify, right, because the statute only allows modalities and those advanced practice areas is for therapists and not assistants. But still, education has changed since the law was put into place. So we'd like to start that conversation. I'm trying to think of what else was in the bill. I think those are the major areas. Sabrina, do you recall any other areas you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I think the big one that we're getting a lot of. The big one that we're starting to get the questions on really is in regards to the advanced practice with modalities. There's a lot of questions about really how is that going to affect practitioners? How is that going to come into play with students? So there's a lot of questions in the how piece of that. So that's something that we know we would like to have the dialogue just in terms of how that's going to be communicated out to the clinicians.
Can you be more specific about what the questions are that you're talking about?
Yeah, so what they're asking is what is going to be the process as of January 1st when the changes go into play in regards to seeking advanced practice for modalities specifically.
Do you want
I'm a little unclear.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
Let me pull up the language, sorry. I have one bar. Bear with me.
I know.
Is the bill in the packet by any chance?
Is the bill in the
Yes,
packet?
yes.
It is.
It's on item 10.
Sorry. We thought this was later.
One of the things that comes to my mind is if you're taking modality coursework in a school, the way that you get credit for that is kind of different, right? I mean, isn't an academic hour in a school different than a contact hour in professional development? So are there some sort of practicalities around how a freshly graduated student would document their hours on modalities, and swallowing and other areas for the purposes of demonstrating they meet the advanced practice requirements?
Correct. So one of the questions that is coming into play is that students are having a concern that are doing or getting the experience for like hand therapy, for example, that are in those clinics. They're having the concern of, is that going to have an impact for them once they graduate? So I think there's some concern as there is around fieldwork placements in general, but they want to know, are those hours going to be looked at differently?
I see, Sabrina, because in our PAMS course is incorporated into a quarter of upper extremity, so I think the students are wondering, is this count one for my advanced practice? And if it does, how do I apply for that through the board now? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for articulating that better.
Is that different somehow from swallowing and hand therapy? I'm curious why PAMS is being brought forward in that way.
PAMS was the easiest to implement in the schools. That's consistent. I think that everyone's pretty close to reaching, it's all embedded in the curriculum. It's very different for swallowing and
This distinction that's the distinction
Yeah,
you're
I
making?
think, and I also think it's because there is a lot more focus, especially in post-acute care right now, as we're going into the new payment models with the outcomes and being able to really use modalities more as an adjunct to get a better outcome in a shorter period of time for things, especially as we're facing the opioid epidemic and everything with the alternatives to pain medication. I think there is this renowned focus that there hasn't necessarily been so much in the past on the use of modalities.
I just wanted to ask about something that's I mean, this is a different direction than I was I'm glad you brought this up as something, but singling out modalities, I was thinking about the ACOTE standards changes and the discussion in our regulatory and legislative and regulatory affairs committee, during which one of the committee members, Luella Grandgard, identified the notion of setting a provision that advanced practices could be phased out for persons graduating under the new ACOTE standards if those standards are strong enough to, to support advanced practices education in the schools. So I was wondering how the interaction between what you're talking about and something of that nature, where we might be looking at a date after which advanced practices would not be necessary due to changes in ACOTE standards, as a different, and this sounds like an interim thing, but
As an approach. going
approach,
forward.
yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, ultimately, I think both associations would like to repeal those requirements. But politically, that would be difficult to do in the legislature, but also, I think some of our members, do find some benefit in advanced practices. So, right, this is an interim measure. The one problem I see with that approach is, the accreditation standards have a lot about the content and content areas, but it doesn't say you need X number hours of supervised experience. Mm-hmm. The regulations in California are very specific on that point. So there isn't a direct mapping between the accreditation standards and what's required in California regulations. It would have to be, a leap of faith there that folks that have that education, that they would get the amount of experience they need before they would start doing, iontophoresis or other advanced areas.
I just know that in the apprenticeship model, that usually is the standard of apprenticeship, and we've talked a little bit about that for assistants. The current thought is usually about, for every 1 hour of classroom, you end up with about approximately 14 hours of on-the-job implementation of what you learn in that hour. So it'd be like 1 hour to 2 days almost, right? I don't know that we've done anything like that for this, but that's, if you look at it, I guess the theory is that you get enough period of time in that to actually use it in a practical setting that you'd learn how to do it.
Yeah, I think a related question is, you have students learning about modalities in school now, and then they go on a field work. Maybe their field work is, in a hand therapy clinic, and they're starting to learn to use modalities. How do they account for those hours? How do they document those hours on the application? I don't have the answer there, but I think that could be one of the questions that comes up, is how to capture that experience as a student.
May I ask the staff about that? Because we've been accepting.
Yeah, so I see a couple of different issues, one having to do with the application process itself, and the schools, because of the whatever the prior date of the ACOTE standards was about addressing the modalities. I know students have been getting the education. I don't think it's ever been suggested that the ACOTE standards need to match California's requirements. I don't believe that. And having been with this board since 2005, I've seen the advanced practice discussion, come up in many different ways over the years. Regarding the applications for the students, what I find interesting is that the students aren't asking their schools. And the only reason I say that, because at least 4 or 5 of the schools have approved courses for their students. Now, what they did was they used the regulatory language that said beyond current ACOTE standards, right? So that's how they got those courses approved. And so I think there needs to be more conversations around that in terms of soliciting different concerns as well as the comments. And I think the schools should be looped in, because they're the ones who are responsible for implementing those ACOTE standards. I believe this board was concerned previously because, for example, modalities specifically, the student did not have to demonstrate competence, right? And this board had a concern with that, and I believe that was ultimately changed.
The demonstration language was returned to, demonstration does not mean demonstration was in the standards, and then that was that was removed, and we commented on, we were among the commenters on how that didn't make sense.
And then one other comment was the fact that historically, the reason advanced practice became an issue in California is because there was not a national minimum education standard. And so this was sort of the solution.
In those areas, yeah.
In those areas, correct.
So we should probably take a look at this beyond ACODE standards. If the ACODE standards have changed, then maybe we need to look at that language.
Yes.
Because it relates differently to it's based on ACODE standards in 2000, 15 years ago. So in the interim, you were looking at what sort of action from the, consideration from the board regarding modalities.
Well, I mean, first we wanted to raise the issue, and we've done that. But secondly, hopefully triggering some sort of review of the applications. I mean, I think the word post-professional needs to come out because it's stricken from statute at the minimum. But then is there any other guidance to those people that are going to be applying about what is different or how to document their education and experience that was basically gained in their entry-level profession? So I don't think there's a simple, quick fix there, but we wanted to bring that up, and certainly if it comes back up on the agenda, we could talk more about it, or if it needs additional study, we're happy to participate in those conversations.
And Heather, to your question as to us getting the question versus the schools, I mean, a lot of members reach out to us all the time with questions, and we don't always necessarily validate, did you also ask your school that question? Because oftentimes they are asking the school and us. So we oftentimes get all types of questions in regards to differences with the scope of practice from members.
Okay.
All right. Any other issues that you'd like to bring up related to items not on the agenda?
Well, I just wanted to return back to the question of, well, not the question, I mentioned that the law changes the definition of, I think installs a definition of continuing competence, and we think that has implications for licensure renewal requirements, continuing competence requirements. Is there a next step there? Maybe that's something that could be discussed at a future board meeting about what that will mean.
Continuing competence.
Right.
And I will share one more thing. Yesterday we discussed these, and I've received a question about the ratio of OTs to OTAs, and we already had a issue that an unmet need to develop a process for asking the board for a different ratio. That we had never really established a process for that because there was a specific provision in the law that you could apply for a different, more. But we're going to have to go through our language around the ratio of OTs to OTAs and still develop that process. So we decided to refer that to the practice committee.
So when you say more than the 3 to 1, or more than the 2 to 1 as current?
The language. Let's go back to the bill.
The existing law says that the number's 2, but that you can petition the board to
For more.
Correct.
That's correct.
That's the part that even prior to the change of 2 to 3, that is still a process that needs to be developed.
So the 3 that was enacted by the law could have been done if we had the process for asking for that through special petition potentially previously, but we actually did not have a process for doing that. That was a clear process. So, and that was an unmet need that we had, was to develop that process. We still have that in the law, so we still need to develop that if you want to go beyond 3. But we also need to clean up any regulations that refer to the 1 to 2 ratio, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So we still have those 2 things, and we are going to try to get our practice. We don't currently have an active practice committee, so we're going to. We have Denise and Sharon have kindly agreed to be on it.
We did?
Yes, yesterday.
I did. I didn't hear anything.
Did you want to mention that one?
I guess.
We also talked, yeah, sure. We also looked at the doctoral degrees and registrations provisions, and the board shall define by regulation the doctoral degrees that are in a related area of practice or study for purposes of subdivision C. That's in the law, so we obviously have some work to do there because it's directed by the new legislation.
Great.
So I'll put that
Thank you.
So did you get that list? Jody and Jeff, did you get that list of things? That's a lot. That's a big list. Okay. Yeah. So now we do have another one to discuss.
2386.
Oh, you're thank you.
Yes.
I thought you were. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know.
Please go
I'm
ahead.
solo now.
Please go ahead,
So
Sabrina.
with 2386,
Yes.
we are continuing to work with the stakeholders on this. We actually have I'm not tech savvy. What is that? A QR code? Is that what that is? Where you scan it and you can take a survey on your phone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be having that at conference for everyone who will be attending to be able to take a new survey with that as we work with the stakeholders. And we continue to work with CPTA on that. We will, however, need to reintroduce another bill in the next session in order to move forward with that. But we hope to have the survey results in moving forward with that. But we continue to work with all stakeholders involved.
What's the survey specifically again?
The survey is for the school credentialing.
Gotcha.
So that
What is the purpose of the survey?
the purpose of the survey really is to find out really who is working in the schools and what roles they play in the schools, and also really moving forward with the bill.
Okay.
I could look and see how many questions, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Is this for 2386?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
All right.
Did you have another question?
I
might
don't.
have the answer. Okay.
You have one?
Thank you.
Is that all? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I have a question, if I may.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Is there any other thing that you are working on in OTEC or AOTA specific to any legislation for occupational therapy? As you can see, the governor signed quite a few that we were looking at, and I just wanted to know if you could give an update on things you might be working on.
In regards with occupational therapy?
Or your legislation that you're looking at for the next year.
Not that that is not, what, can you tell me what page the list is? Sorry. I think
Under
that's.
item
Oh,
10.
sorry about that. It's item 10, and it's after the first page. After the first orange sheet.
Or it could be something not on the list, of course.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that. Sorry.
Yeah, most of it was all signed. There's only two that seemed off of that list that didn't make it through. Yeah, Vopals. And
At this time with the session being done, no. Our big thing is going to be, because this past year, our big, obviously, was AB 2221, and then the AB 2386 were our two big ones that we were working closely with AOTA on, and we'll continue now that AB 2221 is signed into law, so we'll continue with the new author for AB 2386, which will turn into a new number in the next session. So that's where that's our big one with OTEC. For AOTA, did you want to speak to her?
Well, we'll certainly be, we believe the athletic trainers will be
Yeah.
back with their bill to create licensure for them. Negotiations broke down at the end of the session, they'll be back. We're not against regulation for athletic trainers, but we had some issues around scope of practice, and we expect that those discussions will continue.
my only comment would be, like we talked on 2221, it'd be helpful as you move to get a new author. If you think you're going to be successful, you should also think about how we implement it and have an idea of how you could help us make sure that our regs and the processes that we have to be able to either license or whatever is clear for us. We may disagree with it, but you should be able to be prepared to give us some of that in advance, which would have been helpful in 2221. The questions you asked today could have been things you would already have addressed with us is, if we're successful, how do you plan to do that? And could we do a workshop so that way we aren't rushing up a window of time? We've got a few months before that goes in. And so the time to be able to get our ad hoc committees together, or our standing committees together, actually address those things are difficult. So
For AB 2386
Yeah.
for the credentialing.
yeah,
So can I ask how long, because oftentimes, I mean, this was a really fast legislative session. It seemed like there was a lot of changes that kept going back and forth with both of those bills, more busier than what I've seen in my years of being in this position with OTAC. So how long does the board, what's the request of a time frame, I guess, is the question, for you to be able to get a work group together, you guys to start your conversation?
Well, that's an interesting question, because last year we had our first meeting of the year in February, or this year we had our first meeting in February, and you brought to that meeting some proposed language. Because we are obligated to have minimum of 3 meetings a year, and we typically have 4 to 6, but we add meetings as needed. We have constraints in terms of public notice, getting everybody together for unscheduled meetings not previously on the calendar, getting a quorum. We've had some difficulty with that. So we have some constraints about moving as quickly perhaps as you might be able to do in terms of changing language and negotiating. And you can negotiate something and it's done fairly soon, except of course when you're putting a new language in to legislation, of course you don't want to do that every 5 minutes. But we have limits, and so our deliberations, the sooner we know, the better, so that we can plan. We can get people together to make decisions. We can't make decisions without a quorum of members participating.
So essentially the request is when we get the new author and the bill gets reintroduced, you would like to be informed at that time too.
well, and
Correct.
my thing is that your assumption it's going to pass, right? The form you put it in is going to pass, and you're going to know I know it's going to change, but you probably have an idea. All of them always do, but you have an idea of how, if that happens, what would need to change. We're talking today about what needs to change now that 22-21 passed, but we should have had an idea of some of the things that would have had to change if it was successful, and be talking about that early, so that way we're also ahead of the game for our committee as soon as it does pass in its final form. If 2/3 of it stayed as it was at the beginning, we could have already had ideas of how we'd have fixed those 2/3, and then the stuff that changed at the end, the 1/3 remaining, it would have been less burdensome in the shorter period of time to get it done.
The fact is, though, that we did support AB 2386. This board did support that bill, and it didn't seem to have a huge effect on consumer protection, I think was what we decided in our deliberations. So that other things, who knows what form it could take or could get inserted.
Yeah, and we're, with the athletic trainers, it's we assume that it will be back. We don't have a bill number. We don't know where that's going. So I'm sure that will be back on your radar as well.
And if I just may comment, specifically as a practitioner and as a board member, I just want to take an opportunity to address both associations and say how thankful we are that, we started the discussion here about some of the issues that were happening in advanced practice. People were coming to the license board. We knew that the better fit was the practice associations. You took up that charge, you led that charge, and it wasn't a small feat. And although we didn't agree on completely everything, we got to a really good place for the profession and the consumer. And if I haven't had an opportunity to thank you personally for taking that on, I'd just like you to know that it's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you got through it pretty steadfast. And so hopefully, as we put these committees together, grateful for bringing up that feedback. I think some of those changes can come through the practice committee recommending to the board. It can happen pretty quickly. And then there'll be future iterations, of things that need to change.
Any other board comments? Thank you. Thank you, Denise.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Do we have anything else for item 11, legislative items for a future meeting? We kind of talked about some of that. I don't think. Yeah, Heather's. We were talking about the idea that, again, the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee members thought about the ACO standards and advanced practice. It sounds like the associations feel that it's premature to make a move to consider legislation around ACO and the California standard, ACO standards versus the California standards, and
So let me.
you sounded reluctant, Chuck, to
Well, 'cause I
pursue
think
that
there's
for
a couple-
political
I'll
reasons.
attempt to address the issue. There's also an item on your agenda related to the OTD later on. So I think there's a lot of issues here. One issue, and I think that Sabrina meant to bring it up, is in the California university system, the OTD degree cannot be granted. And Heather Kitchen could speak more eloquently to it, but my understanding is that the California system will be pursuing legislation to allow those universities to grant OTD degrees. So that'll be their initiative, but it's going to be something that OTAC will support, and I think AOT would support as well. That's one set of issues. The other is around, the accreditation standards for occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants and all the recent communications around that. Did you have questions about that?
It wasn't about the OTD, because we're going to discuss that later. It was about the sunsetting the advanced practice regulations
Okay.
due to beefing up of the ACOT standards that may
Sure,
cause them to be unnecessary over time, and how to manage that process. Because we did have that discussion during some of our earlier meetings about the board committing to looking at the advanced practice in general, and how we could. Because when the board asked OTAC and AOTA to remove the attestation because it was unworkable, the AOTA and OTAC asked this board to consider taking a closer look at advanced practice in general. And I took that to mean, I don't think I'm the only board member who took that to mean that we would look ahead.
Sure, and
because the attestation was not workable, but something else. And so one of those was the one I just mentioned, the suggestion that we establish a date after which people who graduated from programs would no longer perhaps require advanced practice.
Okay, so I think we need a phased approach. One issue is the most recent standards, right? They're out there, but to be fully implemented, it's going to take a while. So I'm not sure, what the cutoff date would be. So that's one piece. Another is that we need to build support for repealing the advanced practices requirements in our membership. I think we found that some folks do like that you can go essentially get recognition, or that's not the right word, go through the process with the California board, and then you have something that says you've satisfied the regulatory requirements for hands, swallowing, and modalities, and there's some value in that. So we need to have a conversation with our members about, we don't think this is necessary. I think the other piece of it is, and I addressed this before, which is the accreditation standards are about these topical areas. And I think we can make a strong case for modalities and swallowing. Hand therapy, trying to connect the definition in state law of hand therapy to, the accreditation standards is going to be a little bit more difficult to do. So there's the topical, the didactic training, but still in California, the regulations have a large number of hours. And so we'd have to be comfortable with repealing that essentially for practitioners after a certain point. I think you would want to be sure that someone that's going to be providing swallowing assessment is competent to do so. I think the other dimension here is we need to determine where our friends in the legislature are, and I don't mean the elected people, but is this an issue for the physical therapists? Do we want to take this on? In other states, it hasn't been a big deal. Minnesota completely repealed the certification requirements for modalities. Montana, which I never thought I would say, is about to do the same, that this isn't as big of a political issue for them. The swallowing piece, I think, will be a little more challenging with our speech-language pathology colleagues, especially if they view repealing that language would also repeal the regulation related to, there's something in your regulations around advanced instrumentation or some sort of there's a prohibition in the regulations, and I think they're very worried that that would go away. So I think the path forward is, one, implementing, the deleting of the word post-professional, and so those people coming out of school now will have maybe an easier path to getting the recognition. And two, looking at what's currently on the books in terms of the number of hours of didactic training and supervised hours. Is there anything that could be, could that be lessened? What is the right number? And then the next piece, I think, would be looking at legislation to sunset the requirement. You wouldn't want to completely repeal it because you have bachelor's trained occupational therapists out there that may not have any training in that area, and you wouldn't want them, I don't think, doing so. So it's complex.
Yeah, a missing piece of the information for me is always, I'm as an occupational therapist practicing in California, I have worked over the years recently with the physical therapy students, doctoral students coming into the programs and seeing the level of training that they have coming in, and I've supervised physical therapy as well, services, and so I'm just curious about the number of hours of the practical hours. You brought up the idea of how many actual practical hours of training a person has before entering the profession of occupational therapy, and what a requirement is. And I'm thinking the whole purpose of the whole negotiation around those hours was what's the minimum required, and if we've just established, we have a regulation that says that physical therapists come right out of school can be hand therapists, for example, because the PT degree is sufficient to bring them over the top as far as the basic level of competence to do hand therapy, for example, and modalities, I believe, is the same. So what is maybe we should need to take a look at our hours to see if they are equivalent to the baseline hours of a physical therapy student, for example, in terms of practical hours, because if that is where this all got established.
Well, I think the discussion we had last time, we have the new standards coming into effect. PTs have clinical doctorates. We're moving to entry-level doctorate, but it won't be for a while. The other discussion was the consistency, and we understood that not to be the purview of the board to ask schools how many hours or how it's implemented, but that was a discussion we had, because every school, I think, in education, PAMS was easy to implement, and I think that across the boards that's going to be easy to phase out. As far as the schools had implemented that a while ago, and I can, it looks good. Hands and swallowing,
not so much.
It's still inconsistent, and so our question last time was, what are the schools doing? I know if there's education, what about the hands-on? What are the hours? And that's all that's coming to the front now. That's going to come with the new accreditation standards, with having those conversations. So we definitely need to look at it. But my question was, how do we gauge that information from the schools? Like whose job is that to find what education they're getting and how, in order to create this our thing that we're looking for? We need that information, because every school's right now, it doesn't have. The accreditation standards will help that for entry-level OTD, but that's a huge gap from January 1st until those are implemented. We go to the entry-level doctorate. So,
well, it sounds like an effort that is, ACODE and AOTA and it seems like that's typical of the kind of things that they would look at.
Right.
I just know that also I had a physical therapist going to DPT programs who had seasoned physical therapists who would say, I got my DPT, but it was all, I just learned extra stuff about research, and I didn't really want to do research. So a lot of it didn't have to do with the practical skills going to the doctors, which is why it wasn't on the radar that you were thinking that I was talking about the DPT, because usually when you get the doctoral, you learn about research techniques.
It's all about theory.
well,
It's about theory. It's not about practical skills of this nature.
DPTSC is research. The regular DPT is not. They do literature reviews. They don't have to go through the IRB, so it's another level of different education.
Plus the schools are doing a tally of how many credits that they have to get in, and so they're saying, well, if they're doing X number of credits, that's a doctoral degree. Whether
They have specialty
there's a certain amount of that
They
happening.
have specialty tracks.
My I'm going to go back to my other world that I do. And generally, when a person has a specific skill, there's a compensation involved with that additional skill. And there's a certain expectation that they will be more competent than those that don't have to have a specialty skill. And so, if I go back to consumer safety, which is our purview, if we continue to devalue specialty skills, everybody will have just a little of those skills, but not focused on those skills. And will the outcomes be not as good because the pressure will be, some people think that by having additional skills availability, therefore their compensation will go up. So from a practitioner, you might think, well, now that I can do these things, my value will go up. But if it's blended with everything else you do from the employer side and the person who will be deciding what's billable or not, they will be seen as an opportunity to say, well, it's not that important then if you don't have to have specialty training and be pulled out of the group as something special. So you're going to have this pressure to use people who will just have a general, OT licensure versus people who have some advanced practice in addition to, who will have to keep their advanced practice be focused on those skills, and the outcomes for the patients that need those skills probably will be better because the person will focus on it. And I will use an example. My wife has a neurological disorder. It's unique. The problem is the healthcare program wants to send her to any neurologist to treat it. Oh. And as a result, one time she nearly had to have 3 months of a tracheotomy because the doctor who was qualified under the state didn't know how to do the proper injections or the proper muscles to deal with, and nearly made her have to go in a feeding tube for 3 months until the injection wore off. Another one gave the injection in the wrong muscle, didn't nearly make her not be able to swallow, but made the muscle that was the only one that was left giving her strength in her neck and keep her head straight, she gave it in the one that was helping. And so my concern as a consumer protection is, as we continue to dilute specialty skills for people who really need those specialties by just putting them in with everybody else, the outcomes will not be as good. We need to be able to have people have specialty skills for specialty ailments. And it isn't always best to have everybody trained to do everything. And usually in my world, in non-healthcare and not consumer protections, the people who are trained in everything. I mean, I remember as a very young kid, my dad said he was a, jack of all, master of none. That's the concern in real life. A contractor you pick may be a general contractor, but their strength is electrical work, and they'll do really well at that, but maybe not structural. We don't want to get into that. I don't feel. I think we need to look at continuing to differentiate some of these skills and create some recognition for those skills. And that's how those people, for the purpose of compensation, who may be pressing the associations that they want to get recognized to be able to do more, need to look at it versus looking at, I want to be able to come out of school saying I can do more. That's my piece.
Very good point.
I guess I agree with you. Well, my only question is, since California is the only one that has these 3 specialties in law, is it really a subject for regulation, or is it a certification process outside of regulation? But I agree with you about the value of specialty. And I know AOTA has some specialty programs.
Sure, we have board and specialty certifications. There are a lot of specialties in occupational therapy that don't have any specific legal recognition or requirements around, and they're risky as well. So, but part of that is the law says you have to be competent. You can't provide interventions for which you are not competent. The other piece of it is, if you're not competent and know what you're doing, you're not going to have your job for very long. So, I mean, there's different levels here to consider. I mean, the fact is that California has the advanced practices, more than 15 years now. Mm-hmm. So as we make changes, I think it would be difficult to simply just repeal those requirements, right? We're going to have to find a way out, a phased approach. We have to deal with folks that are coming out of school now versus those that didn't have that training. And we also live, the association live in a political world that we need to make sure that we build support with the legislature to get it done, to assure that, that the consumers will be protected. We don't want people that are incompetent modalities to be slapping hot packs on people and injuring them. We don't want that. We don't want people that are incompetent in swallowing assessment doing the wrong thing. So we look forward to continuing the conversation with the board. I think we've made some good progress here with this legislation, and we'll continue to work at it.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other board comment on that? Should we move on?
Regarding future items for legislation, we're still on that topic, right?
Yes.
So I was wondering if, can we make suggestions for things that the board might want to look at that's outside of what's here? Or do we wait for our executive director? How does this legislation get put on here? Is it a fluid thing where we suggest things, or does it come from?
That's a good question.
For item 11, so it can be board suggested, it could be suggestions from the public, and then the board really can only discuss it, not in the policy aspect of it, but whether or not they do agree it should be put on a future agenda.
I mean, I think we could instruct the staff to look at some of these items, for example, the forms and the FAQs.
Which aren't legislation.
Right. They're not, yeah, and then, exactly, so we could just ask, we don't need to do a vote on those, but we could instruct them to look, to go through and look at these things that Chuck kindly listed for us, to see what needs updating, and then bring them to future meetings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's not my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But so like, for example, my practice area is working with the elderly. So, and that I would represent a certain portion of practitioners in the state of California who are doing the exact same thing. I imagine going forward, Sabrina, you also work with the elderly, is that right? Yeah. So I imagine going forward that, things that might come before us are things like elder abuse that our profession might have to look at. So I would be interested to see some positioning, aside from just these ones that come up that directly say occupational therapy. We have 4 practitioners on here with 4 different specialty areas that represent pieces of the parts of the practice. Yeah. And so why not look at legislation that is specific to those things to see if there's a relevance for occupational therapy? So, for example, might we take a position on some of the legislation related to elder abuse? And I've actually already talked to 2 legislators in the state of California specific to that topic, because that's one that's very interesting to me. And so anyhow, I just was wondering if we are able to insert that sort of thinking here as well.
Can I just say one last? Chuck, and you might help me clarify, isn't Medicare kind of, something's changing in Medicare, they're having discussions about perceived need and reimbursement going forward that we have to be mindful of from a practice area too, that's affecting the skilled nursing facility circuit?
I'm sure Sabrina knows all about that.
Right,
The answer is yes, and maybe we should make a pitch for the UTAC conference presentations, but there's a lot going on with Medicare, and Sabrina's full agreed.
Yeah, so you're talking about, Jeff, come up here.
Yes, please.
Sorry,
He's
Sabrina.
giving me a look.
We are being webcast, so that's...
Okay, so you're talking about PDPM, which is the patient-driven payment model that goes into effect October 1st of 2019 that will affect our Medicare Part A reimbursement system within skilled nursing facilities. There is a lot that is happening under the PDPM. And so it is going to be something that's going to be discussed in quite a bit of detail at the OTAC conference. We've got 3 legislative sessions on Saturday that touch upon that. All the professional organizations are really trying to figure out what does it actually mean in the essence of it. At the core of it, I guess for the purposes of the board and what this does mean for post-acute care is we have to remember that written in legislation for it is that this is a change to the reimbursement model. This is not a change to the practice model. So there's a lot of myths out there that are going on right now and a lot of unknowns still as things are kind of coming underway. The National Association, so NASAL and ACA, so the American Healthcare Association, they're going to start fully like their road trip of the training of the PDPM as it's known come January. And so everyone's still trying to figure this out. This has been I mean, this was the heart of the NARA association in ASL, ACA. We're in the middle of conference season, and this is what everyone's talking about. But at the core of it is that it's not a change in our practice model. And so I think that's what we all have to remember. There will be changes in the way that we deliver the services, of course, but outcomes matter. And so kind of the advanced practice conversation we were having, outcomes will matter. And so there will be, there is a reduction in reimbursement when it comes to day 21, and there are variations into how someone is placed into the different payment models. But we are moving away from the current PPS model, which is our prospective payment system that we currently are reimbursed with under our Medicare Part A. We are moving away from that, and we're moving more towards patient-driven. So meaning that there is no incentivization anymore for rehab therapy minutes to be driving the reimbursement. Right now, rehab generally 99% of the time squashes the nursing component of it for the current PPS model. That all goes away. And so there's a lot, more than a 5-minute spiel. There's a lot that's going to be going on with that.
And I was asking for clarification because of the skilled services that
Yes.
OT is supposed to provide.
Yeah, so
right,
the
as a skilled
definition,
practitioner.
and that's where I wanted to highlight and where a lot of the misconception on a lot of the, the forum discussion boards are going on. It's not a change to the definition of skilled criteria. So all of that still comes into play. So they still have to require the level of knowledge, skill, and sophistication of a licensed therapist to be able to meet the skilled criteria for the therapy component of it. Those things still come into play. So you still have to be a licensed, OT or OTA to be able to perform occupational therapy services.
But if I may add to that related to Medicare, and the population I work with is the new Medicare enrollee, the well side of the elderly population. So I might just add on that side as well, the things for us to look at. I recently, the team that I manage, we helped the new Medicare enrollee, so we've listened and have met with each of the health plans. And the health plans are putting a very specific focus on social determinants. And how that makes a difference to occupational therapy is if you really look into the health plans, and this is where I wonder if we want to be preemptive and just look at the positioning on it, there are in-home health services that are being offered that are not by anybody that's licensed. You're aware of that, right? All the health plans are now offering not all, most are offering a certain amount of hours. Most are offering a certain amount of respite care. You see what I mean? And so there are things that we just want to be mindful of, both as a board and as a practice. As an association, that we hope you'll be driving certain things specifically as people start to try to do things that are outside of, similar to what we do outside of a license.
I think that's a very important, piece of it, for the fact that all of us, the board, the associations, it's about protecting the practitioner and the consumer at the end of the day. So when we've got people who are going and providing some of those services and not necessarily going and reaching out to their occupational therapist, that we do need to be mindful of. And to continue to educate the public really on the role of occupational therapy and being able to, live longer, safer within their home environment, and the value that we bring in that.
And if I may, the only thing I would add to that, if it was a call to action as I've reviewed all this, so let's just say the way of the world, it's not like occupational therapy has to be on everything, that's not what I'm advocating for. But at a minimum, if they are going to look at a caregiver type that is not licensed, which is what is happening now. I mean, it is happening. There's family members that do that. It would be very cool to see occupational therapy take a real big emphasis in that discharge planning. Focus on that as an association. So that's
Well, I think that's very good, Denise, because you're talking about, and I know that you are involved in managing adult day health programs, which include occupational therapists, but are Medi-Cal, Medicare programs, and the Medi-Cal population is the population that has in-home supportive services. So we've been talking pretty much about looking at Medi-Cal, making sure that Medi-Cal services are there, and OT training of those caregivers is important.
That's my, just so you know,
Yeah.
that is the company I work for is the largest PACE provider in Southern California. But aside from that, I have been brought there to really help them focus on the well population. So it is that Medicare.
Yeah.
And I do have colleagues who are working on the Medi-Cal side. And my team will do that. We'll sign them up, yeah. But it's all very interesting is what I'm saying. And there's definitely, as the health plans go this way, we just want to be on the forefront. That's all I'm.
So are you suggesting a specific legislative item that you want the board to discuss whether or not it should be on a future agenda? I mean, like, do you have a specific suggestion that you know, everyone wants to discuss?
Or do you just want us to watch for elder abuse legislation that comes up and things like that? Put things on the radar.
So my specific ask, if I'm able to do this, and we can do this one of two ways. I can go away and specifically look for legislation, come back and suggest it to the board, and you can agree if you want it on. Or the other option is, can I ask that staff, in your capacity, that however you look up the legislation, I imagine you have like a red phone to legislation, right?
She reads every bill.
So kind of let's just pretend you did. In that world, what would be my request is if you see something like that come up and you think it links based on the request, is it possible to
Other healthcare legislation is
Yeah.
what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing there are no suggested future legislation items out of the board. I mean, I'm just going back to item 11. I mean, it's
specific ones? Not yet.
okay.
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay. We sidebarred.
No, we didn't.
We can certainly bring it up at our next meeting. Have that item on the next agenda.
No, I
We'll look at that.
The deadline to get bills
Legislative
into
proposals.
council format is going to precede the board's first meeting, so
Well, that's right.
you'll have a full list of.
Okay.
Which is one of the reasons that we wanted to address the, if advanced practice, issue. But it sounds like the associations are not prepared to move on any of that. So
Okay.
we just have to
I
look
know.
at.
Correct.
I'm a
In
little
terms of
surprised.
legislation, repeal the requirements, no. I mean, we're done tinkering with practice act at the moment.
Okay.
I think there's a good opportunity out there.
We'll definitely.
All right. So we're done with item 11, are we? Any further? Did you have something to say, Reza? Okay. So we're moving on to item 22, which that leads into discussion and possible action on making appointments to the board's committees. We have already discussed Sharon and Denise on the practice committee. I'm looking forward to getting talking to people over this weekend to try to get some more people because I think it's important to have people with education experience and current information and a couple of different practice areas for some of these issues that we brought up that we need to make changes to. Do other people? So please, board members, send suggestions and feel free to recruit good candidates for the practice committee this weekend, and not just this weekend. Do we have any further discussion on? Oh, and then the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee, we have will reconvene. Is it appropriate for the practice committee to come up with changes and then send them to the Legislative Regulatory Committee and then go to the board, or just bring things to the board on these? I guess that's a question I have. I was having gone through the legislative process,
The
B&P sends it over to.
What do you foresee in that scenario, the practice committee coming up with that would go? Can you be more specific, and then
That's an
I'll know
excellent question.
then I'll know if it makes sense.
That's an excellent question. So, continuing competence requirements, advanced practices, post-professional, forms and facts, I guess not. Supervision of aides, no, not really.
Some of what Chuck said falls in there.
I guess I can't identify anything right now. Specific.
I would say, but to answer your question specifically, I would say the things that have come up today are already in law, so it would just make sense for the practice committee to make recommendations for the board.
Yeah.
At least that's how I see it. If it was something that was not in law, I don't know that I see the practice committee addressing it, but in the event that they were, sure, there'd be some crosswalking with legislative or however you want that to go. But in this case,
Yeah.
my comment speaks more to, because they're already in law.
I think that makes. Any other thoughts on that?
No, I'm curious, I know we have these 4 committees listed here that are standing committees, and we just got volunteers from Sharon and Denise to be on the practice committee. We know that you and Sharon are on the administrative committee. Do we have an education and outreach committee, and do you see one needed? And do you have a legislation and regulatory affairs committee standing, and do you see one needed?
We have no idea how much we'll need the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee, and they're 2-year appointments, so we'll continue that. There's probably something may well come up that the board would like us to review. But it's true that we don't have currently an education, the education committee.
That's one of the names I gave you for, right? It was for the education committee.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But I would just remind the board, we do have an ad hoc committee working on some education items, so
Those participants are good candidates for the education committee, yes. All right. Shall we move on to item
23.
14?
Oh.
Discussion and possible action on moving the board's office. Heather, I'd like to give you the floor.
So you should have got a handout this morning that includes an email indicating that our current rent is $1.73 a foot. That is, so there is a standard lease has 4 years firm and then 4 years soft. Our current lease, we're in the 3rd 1-year extension following the 4-year soft terms. And it's my understanding that the building owner is not interested in extending that, but is looking for a lease for all tenants that are remaining. And the rent is going up to, I believe, $190 or $195 a foot for the first year, and then it's phased approach. The reason I'm bringing this to the board, and it should be the next item that talks about the costs. You should have its preliminary space project estimate form, and it's broken down by fiscal year. So a couple of things. In anticipation of the move, in fiscal year 16-17, we set aside money, it's like basically a savings account. It's called the Architectural Reserve Fund. I funded that in 2 fiscal years, 16-17 and 17-18, 91 year and 120 the following year. I'm anticipating this year being able to set aside 110. So what you can see in the middle column in fiscal year 19-20 at the bottom line is they're looking at $487,000 for the move, the purchasing of the new furniture, the tenant improvements. And so with the savings that have occurred in my estimate of this year, then we have an unmet need of only about $85,000. Okay, so so I'm raising this issue because originally the Department of Consumer Affairs was looking at doing a BCP, budget change proposal, to either account for the increase in the rent for both the current Evergreen tenants as well as those that are moving elsewhere, and also doing a rent adjustment. So for example, you can see up here that our rent is $80,000 a year. It's actually slightly higher, but our budget's $45,000. And so every year, I have to save money to make sure, kind of rob Peter to pay Paul, if you will, to ensure that we're able to pay our rent. So this rent correction would increase that $45,000 budget line item to be consistent with what our actual rent is. The lease negotiations at the Evergreen location did take a little longer than planned, and so it's my understanding that the department has both alerted agency as well as Department of Finance, and they're looking at doing a spring finance letter, which means basically requesting the funding in January. The one drawback to that, though, is that you don't know until the governor signs the budget if that funding is provided. Expenditure, even though I do think I've done a good job, setting aside the savings in anticipation of this, that won't be a huge hit in that year's budget.
And Heather, what is the square footage, price per square foot on the
It's only
proposed
4662.
location?
So
4662.
4662, there's a floor plan in your materials.
Last page, Richard. Right here.
So, and I have a printout, like right now, we have only 3,300 square feet. I think we paid for 3,859, but that includes the common area. We won't have to pay for a common area at the new building.
No, but you said it's $1.90 per square foot.
Or
Yeah,
95 at the Evergreen location.
The Evergreen location.
And we're looking at 220 at the new location. It's in a complex of 2-story brick buildings. It's a much more professional office. It's a mix of both private companies and other government agencies.
And there's some build-out improvements offered by the new landlord as well that you discussed with me. Are there not?
There are some
What are they called?
Credits, build out
tenant
credits.
improvements, TIs. So for example, one of the requirements of those staying at the Evergreen location was to install some new security fencing because for those of you who haven't been to the office location, it's at a corner of 2 streets, and along one of the streets, the building is lower than the road, and so the homeless often come down and sleep up against the building. And so they have increased the mobility of the security guards to prevent them from bringing themselves and all of their materials down. So that was one of them. They're installing, and the fence that backs up to the light rail where, they have safety issues and the police have increased the presence
If
there.
people hang out at the light rail station.
They are installing a mesh attachment to that fence so you can't see right through.
Mm-hmm.
And with the increased foot patrol, there have been fewer activities because oftentimes they would throw things over the fence and it breaks the windows on the cars that are parked along the fence. So and we've had a problem with gunshots in the windows, not just in our office location. From stray bullets, it was not targeted at Jeff personally. but not just our office. There have been other offices in this building, and the landlord replaces the window real soon. I'm strongly recommending that that the board be behind the office moving to the new location.
That sounds not only safety, but forecasting what the board needs to function moving forward with those 2 vacant positions. It just looks like something that needs to be done forward.
Where is the new location?
It is about a mile east of the current location.
Okay.
And so it's on the Arden Way across from the mall, the Arden Fair Mall. And I'm sorry, I did neglect to mention there was one other place that we looked at, but it's quite a bit more southeast of the current office location, and getting a pulse of the staff with more than half living north of the current location. This would add a significant extension to their daily commute to the point that it would disrupt staffing levels because several people would not make that additional. When you're already driving, 45, 50 minutes, and then to drive another 25, southeast. Some might do it and change their mind, obviously, but the others have already said that they don't want to. And so just being mindful of the location I'm proposing is close to the current location, our current office, but in a I'd say safer area. It's still close to the area hotels, And my concern about moving to the other location was that there are no hotels near that location, as well as it's a longer commute both to the Department of Consumer Affairs, to the airport, to the downtown. All of that, increases. And so I believe that was most of my reasons for the recommendation to the Arden Way location.
Heather, I have a question for you just on that. So it's 4,800 square feet. Is it at 1.73? 1.73 or 1.92?
So the current rate is 1.73. The new rate for people remaining in the existing building will be 190 or 195 for the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And the new place is 220?
220, right. So it's roughly 30 cents a square foot, 25 or 30 cents a square foot higher than if we stayed in the current building.
But there's gonna be an assessment for fencing, and it's only a 1-year deal. How long would the contracted rate at the 220 be?
So it's
Is it for
only
multi-year
1,500
contracted
more.
rates?
It's 1,500 more and it's safer. I just ran the numbers. Let's vote.
Is it a
Also,
voting item?
also, if you stayed, would you gain the space for the extra 2 people, or you have to build that out?
There is no space,
There's
so
no provision.
we would have to go to a different part of the
And it's
building,
1,000 more square
and we
feet.
would still have
You
to
have to build
buy
it
all
out.
the furniture
You have to
and
build it
pay
out.
for the build out.
So that's an extra expense that's not factored into the per
Correct.
square foot.
Right, and then, I'm so sorry.
So it's 1,000 more square feet. It's 1,500 more tops. It's in a safer area, and it fits the needs of the staff.
Correct.
And it also would work for board coming in. So there's 5 good reasons to support
Yes.
this.
I had the same thoughts when Heather talked to me about it, Denise, exactly what you're saying, but I thought that it was important to bring it to the whole board.
Thank you.
Because I thought you would feel the same way.
And one other thing, in the new Arden location, the landlord is also offering to offer $40 a square foot towards our TIs. So whatever $40 times 46.62, that would, so that the out of pocket's even less is my point. I think it's 160,000. I mean, it's a sizable amount of money.
Well,
Do you
Denise,
need a motion? Is that what we need?
Yes.
do other, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Move
so
to support
I
them.
propose to a motion to support the move to the new Arden Way building.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Sharon, a second from Jeff.
Sure.
And do we have any further board discussion?
Nope.
Hearing none, any public comment? Hearing none. Laura, can you call the vote?
Yes. Sharon?
Yes.
Beata? Yes. Denise?
Yes.
Laura? Yes. Jeff?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes. Motion carries. Good luck. It's a big job.
Yeah.
Very good.
Do we get access to the health club
That makes sense.
when we visit?
Item number 23 is our next item, and that's the executive officer's report. So again, to Heather Martin.
Yeah, I'm done. That's the money. You have my my brief report. So included budget information is an attachment. I'll just kind of quickly go through the narrative and then explain in detail the attachments. There was a Breeze release. There's a listing of the major changes that happened. I think to note, this is probably something that we could share with OTAC and it can go in future newsletter, but for example, the National Practitioner Data Bank query fee is being added to the new applicant costs, if you will. So now they will have a $50 application fee and a $2 MPDB query fee that will be required to pay. We did have issues where folks were still submitting their applications online and failing to pay that application fee. I think I've mentioned this has been going on, since we've been on Breeze, and so what we've finally resulted, because these Breeze releases, we have to request them far in advance, and so, for example, we've already basically filled up what will come out in April. We're looking at after that. But over the last couple of years, we have constantly tweaked and changed the language that the applicants see, and they're still not paying it. So one of the things we did is we made this new like pre-application transaction that actually requires them to pay the fee, and then they can go in and submit the actual application. So
Yeah.
that's
They
new,
pay
it's
upfront.
unique, but it's will ensure that it's about 18, 24 months for that process. But then we could even do like another year out with a, if on or after this date applications must be.
Okay.
I think you would address any demographic issues that may be an issue with kind of the reluctance to the electronic. But I feel like that's certainly 2-3 years is a long time to give folks a heads up, and that's certainly a communication piece for the schools to the students, right? When you graduate, you're going to have to do this.
Okay.
So, and board staff provides support. We do outreach to schools, giving them snapshots of the screens they will see when they're doing it. So when they go into that, if they're kind of held up, they would have a resource, and we even to help people, because for current licensees that aren't using the online system, they're not understanding that they simply need to have a user ID and password, and they can kind of link their access to the existing licensing record. And so to help them, we have now placed a computer on a rolly kiosk thing in the lobby. So when somebody comes in to pay with their little check, we're hoping we can guide them there and walk them through and provide that personal assistance. So then we are hoping we get a shift of one more person,
Right.
as we can provide that kind of encouragement and hand holding to.
Do you have do you know the demographics on the people who still use paper? Age, years in practice?
Socioeconomic status.
I think we could ask for a report to be ran on that.
Because the context of my question is, if my assumption is correct, we are within 10 years, we are within a decade of people who've grown up using a computer, are going to use a computer, will apply online, and so therefore, we won't have to do anything with the regs. It'll just organically be what it's supposed to be.
So, some of the other boards do require that application be online, and they haven't done regs. And speaking with Reza, we would rather, if the board so wanted to move in that direction, I would just recommend that we go through the regulatory process to eliminate any concerns, as well as provide that transparency, to the future profession.
If
I like your phase out. I like your suggestion. I think it's enough for me.
yeah, so Heather, it looks like we get maybe 1 to 2 a day, maybe 2 per work day paper applications. If you divide it up, and then let's say 50% of those people are gonna still want to do paper applications even after this happens. So they're gonna have to call up the board, and a staff member will email them. And so you feel that their staff can handle that
Yes.
that level.
Yes.
And then, okay, and so that's important. And then maybe, okay, good. And there'll be a clear process for asking for that on the website, like go here to get your paper application, or
We'll
just
probably
phone
just
call.
put a blurb about,
Or just phone call.
call or email the board
Yeah.
if you want. Sort of like we're
So
going
as
to do
long
with the renewal notice, right?
So my fellow Luddite OTs will be able to still be able to use that.
They can.
Do
They
you
know
need-
where to
do
go.
you-
They'll know where to go.
Do you need a motion, or is this just a direction? What do you need?
I would like to have public comment on this item. Just to,
Why? I just want to know if we need
I think it would help.
a. Okay. So whatever.
oh, maybe we'll do a motion. If we're going to do motion, then we'll have an opportunity for public comment. You wanna
So
move?
I make a motion that we remove the PDF file from online, and we allow the licensee to contact the board should they want to fill out a paper application.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Beata
Yep.
seconds.
Yep.
Motion on the table. Any board discussion? Public comment?
I mean, it makes sense.
Thank you.
Fine with it. Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Call the vote.
Sharon?
Yes.
Beata?
Yes.
Denise?
Yes.
Laura? Yes. Jeff?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes. Motion carries.
Okay. So then also on here, future agenda items. These are ones that have come up in past meetings we will add to this list, the ones that are resulting from this meeting. The one thing I've added under D, the italicized item, second from the bottom, has to do with, I think I've touched on this yesterday, but with the passage of AB 2138, there will need to be a review and proposed amendments to the regulations. And so I would just ask the board to consider either delegating that to the admin committee that was already reviewing the disciplinary guidelines, or some other action to address this, because again, the effective date is supposed to be July 1, 2020. It's a fairly optimistic goal, and we're insofar as we're kind of already behind in terms of that time frame. But I would just suggest that it's, this shouldn't be waiting until the first meeting of next year. That this is something that should happen sooner. And I would also recommend in early December having a board meeting, teleconference board meeting to discuss recommendations that either come out of that committee or from staff, or however you guys want to do it.
Would we need a motion to delegate this to the administrative committee?
Yes.
We can't do it.
I'm gonna make the motion.
We discussed this yesterday a little bit. If you're familiar, members of the audience, you're familiar with 2138, AB 2138, which we're referring to. It has to do with the convictions, persons with convictions and licensing.
Yeah.
So and we had a discussion about it yesterday. So
You heard me, I made a motion.
Jeff made a motion to
advance this challenge to our administrative committee for making sure that our disciplinary guidelines match the new law under 2138.
Thank you.
Second.
Laura seconds. Public comment? Board comment? I'm sorry. Public comment? None? Hearing none from the board or the public. Let's vote.
Taking roll. Sharon?
Yes.
Beata? Yes. Denise?
Yes.
Laura, yes. Jeff?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes. Motion carries.
Okay. Communication update. Okay, so now real quickly. So budget information. We still don't have our, as a reminder, the fiscal year ended June 30th. We always get what's called a month 13 report, and with the new fiscal system, it is coming a little bit later than usual. So this is a month 12 report showing expenditures.
I still need a
That's
magnifying
so
glass, even for the larger
It's-
version.
The paper is larger, but the font's only a tiny bit
Still,
larger, so. And then, so taking those numbers, moved it over into a fund condition. The one thing that it would appear that is not on here for fiscal years 2021 and 21-22 are the increases. You may recall there was a two-step renewal fee increase, and so with a 1/1/2021 effective date, that fiscal year should show half the fiscal year with the old fee and half at the new fee, and then 21-22 would be the first one. So we will give updated versions of that, and then that will of course impact the months in reserve. That will go up as well. Any questions?
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Okay.
I had a question about E. We kind of skipped. You mentioned the office moved the rulemaking files forwarded to DCA for control agency approval for filing as well for a 45-day notice and 2 license surrenders. We talked about surrenders yesterday regarding Rez's motion. I was just wondering if you could tell us about how those surrenders, what the mechanism for the surrenders was on those 2 cases.
Okay, so the surrenders mentioned in my report are stipulated surrenders that were in response to an accusation and petition to revoke probation. So under my delegation of duties, I'm delegated the authority to adopt that. So stipulations imposing terms and conditions come before the board's vote, but the stipulated surrenders, I'm delegated the authority to sign. So somebody who agreed to probation and then failed to abide by the terms and conditions of that probationary license, then we go out to revoke it, and if they want, they can surrender the license to avoid going through that hearing process.
So they probably had so it was like a drug test that wasn't clean, or a report missing, or a failure to renew, those kinds of things?
Yes, but it would be many positive tests, usually not.
Usually.
You wouldn't just wouldn't revoke for just one.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize, not just one.
Mhm. Well, I mean, because when the violations occur, we have to transmit to the Attorney General's office, and then that takes like 3 to 5 months. So before them to prepare the document, and so that's why there's usually multiple violations by the time we're getting to that process.
Okay, and also you could have a false positive, I suppose, and you could eliminate the possibility of that.
Yes, but we
Through
have a
multiple samples.
process to test, do a second test.
Oh, you do?
Oh,
Okay.
not
But
we don't,
sample
but the
test.
testing
The-
vendor does.
the testing vendor
The
does.
testing vendor, yes, they use a partial sample for the test, and then they will retest it. We can also increase, the testing. We also have the ability to ask for an MRO, which is a medical review officer review, where they actually contact the participant and, talk to them about that. Let's say I'm training for a marathon, and so I've increased my fluid intake, and so then, for example, the MRO would talk about if you're increasing your intake, make sure you take your test early in the day, not, at 6 p.m. when you've been, power loading up with water all day, for example. So they do give them suggestions about that, or perhaps they're using alcohol-based products that are also affecting that,
So the protocol is not necessarily descended to the Attorney General after the first couple of positive tests, or it is, but then by that time there's usually more, is what you're saying.
Yes, so the
But-
second issue. But so what happens though,
There might not be more,
there might not be, and so
But-
if, let's say it was a
but you would still accept
one-time
it.
blip, no, not necessarily, because let's say there was a one-time positive, then we issue what's called a cease practice order. It's not subject to the APA, but they are instructed that they can't work. Their employer is advised that they can't work. And then there's a process where after a minimum of
Medical
30 days of no positive tests, that there's a process for them to go back to work.
I see. So if someone tests positive, they get a cease practice order that's for the next 30 days.
Well, they just like it's imposed because we don't know if they're going to have, right? And so what can happen is, let's say there's a positive on the 2nd, and we issue the cease practice order, so the days start counting, and then there's a positive again on the 16th. Well, it kind of resets the clock, right? Because you have to have a minimum of 30 days of negative drug screens. So we don't issue a cease practice order for a particular amount. It's just a process that prevents them from working. And then on the back end, if there's continued compliance, there's a way for them to go back to work.
Isn't there also, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't ask the question, but usually when a person's provided a sample, even before they notify you that the sample's been is positive, they usually do a review back with the person to make sure there's no reason for a false positive, in addition to the second sample testing. So maybe they had,
No, that's not the case. No, so when the specimen is tested, then it takes a while for them to do that second, or they have to do a second test, and then they report to us the positive.
Okay.
So they don't intervene in that process. They leave that up to us to contact the individual.
Okay. All right. So there's not a medical review officer automatically that looks in there and says, the reason you tested for an opiate, do you have a prescription that we're unaware of, and that
We do that.
You do
we
that.
ask them
Okay.
that. Yes,
Okay.
and, because for example, we don't tell someone that you can't use pain medication.
Right.
We just say that if you're going to have this, you need to have the prescriber give us the information
Right.
about that, right?
Right,
Because you can't test positive for an opiate because I had dental surgery 7 months ago.
Right.
It has to be
Concurrent.
pain medication for a current condition.
Right.
And so those are the terms that are set forth in the disciplinary guidelines. And then the individual is reminded, and sometimes it's just a matter of they didn't forward to us that information.
Right.
Because we also ask for the duration, right? I mean, is this like an ongoing, or is this like a 10-day thing? So, but the licensee has to pay for that medical review officer's contact of them, in addition to their testing. So we normally wait till there's after more than one test, and we wouldn't have them review it in advance, I guess.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for that. That was very interesting. It's very educational. I learned something every time we talk about this.
Thank you, Heather.
So next in the materials is the handout. This is my proposal for this one-page renewal notice reminder, if you will, in response to the concern that folks, even though we want to gear them towards Breeze to renew, we can't require that. So this language was added in the middle paragraph. So again, if somebody wants to send in a check, then and the next item is the 4-page renewal, what we will do is because these renewal notices are already generated in the system, they simply won't be mailed. So what we'll do if a licensee says, can you please send me a renewal form because I want to pay with a check, then we will send them the standard 4-page renewal form.
I like how this
So they
is
still
all-
have it.
all catching your attention right there. It's-
Yeah.
Does
And
this-
it's a reminder.
Does it require a motion to?
No, I'm
adopt this?
just, unless you strongly dislike it, I was just trying to update you from the August meeting.
Sounds good.
So then following, you have the data for the applications. Again, in Breeze, the term is transaction. That's how we sort these. I'm not sure if you have any questions or if anything jumps out. See verifications, there's a lot of fluidity to the profession. Small uptick in setting to retired. Address changes again, we're getting a lot of them, but not all of them, so.
It kind of reflects the profession right now. We have a whole group, and even in education, retiring now.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah. Any questions about that? So the next one's the enforcement statistics. Complaints opened, arrest reports received, complaints closed, pending, I think I mentioned yesterday, 30 cases at the AG, so that's probably the most ever. You have the status of those cases.
Heather, did you ever do a graph of like?
How many more
So,
13s?
it would be interesting to see a line graph over time of some of these things. I mean, I know that it's
Complaints received or in, accusations or final decisions that are imposing probation.
because it's DCA.
Right, well, board staff, but we only pay for the AG for those hours, for those cases that we refer to them and the hours that they spend.
Would the board be interested in seeing this information? Am I the only one? And I don't want to
No, I think it'd
overburden
be
the
interesting.
staff. So.
I think this is fine, just the way it is.
How about I do a hand, I'll do like a one-time 3-year, and
Yeah,
then that way
something like
maybe you guys can see it and you can see.
Okay.
Thanks. That'd be
Were
nice.
you asking
It's
for
not
that,
a high
Richard?
price.
Because were you asking for that to see the financial impact?
And trends.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Well-
could support that.
Especially since yesterday we did Heather's performance evaluation and the discussion, around how the workload might have changed this year to year. The workload of the entire staff. And also with the staff, staffing changes, addition of the 2 staff. It would be interesting to see what changes are year to year, so you could see how the board is doing over a multi-year period. That's what I was thinking. And
Yeah. And then on the back side, you have all the decisions that became final during the first quarter of the fiscal year.
Any board questions on this information?
Okay, hearing none, then the next one is the citations. This quarter was a little bit short just because we had so many cases transmitted to the AG's office. Apologize, the OT citations, the legend actually went to the back side. PDU audit violations exceeded the address changes, so I think that's important to note because typically address changes have always been the highest, but we're still having issues with that. For the PDU audit violations, citations, like if you just look at the top two, for example, they're both for the same violation, except the reason for the difference is if somebody's just short, so maybe they had 21 of the 24 hours, then there's a smaller fine. The 600 is for those that did zero or had no proof at all. So that's a big difference.
And this is the first time I noticed the failure to cooperate and the unprofessional conduct. Those relate to,
So failure to cooperate, for example, if an individual is audited and they're sent
like what we talked, okay.
letters or someone, certified and they simply don't respond,
Okay.
then we issue a citation for failure to cooperate and we order them to show proof of the 24. And sometimes they still blow us off, so.
And what about unprofessional conduct?
Unprofessional conduct, Jeff, could you answer that question?
Yeah, it's like our catch-all for everything. I don't really remember
That don't
the exact
need,
circumstances that surrounded these, but
Okay.
you know what, we can provide examples to you.
They're actually zero during this period, so.
I just, for some reason, saw the key today, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. I think
Sometimes
it's
it
sort of
falls
like if
off
it
the
doesn't
list.
neatly fit into these
Yeah.
were the most common, and so then we sort of have this other like catch-all, if you will.
okay.
But you see, it's not used very often. I mean, simply because it's typically these, failure to cooperate, failure to disclose,
Right, the more common ones.
are the more common ones, address change.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we have OTA citations on the next page. Any questions? Okay. And then lastly, we just always give you a snapshot of the current probationers. And as a reminder, on the effective date, when it's on the right and there's an asterisk, that means that the individual has been told, they could either currently be told or were told in the past during the period of their probation, and that's why the length of probation may exceed what the effective date is.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Any board questions for Heather? Hearing none, at this time, I'd like to take a 10-minute break, since we've been at this for a couple of hours.
Okay.
All right, so we can return at 11:35, 11-minute break. We are resuming our meeting of the Board of Occupational Therapy. Are we ready, Cesar, to continue? October 25th. We just came back from a break and we are on item number 24 on the agenda. Discussion and consideration of whether the clinical internship experience completed as part of the Doctor of Occupational Therapy OTD degree program is considered practice, and further discussion regarding the OTD programs in California which are not accredited by the Accreditation Council on Occupational Therapy Education. Do you want to introduce this item, Heather, or should I?
Yeah, you know.
So the issue here is that there are several occupational OTD programs in California, not yet accredited, assigning work experience, assigning projects, doctoral projects to students. They're going out and practicing, and I believe a lot of them are like year-long projects that may be unsupervised, not licensed, and that we have some regulations which are in section 20 for agenda, in the sections for agenda item 24. And our questions were, how do it introduces the issues here and includes the relevant sections. The first issue is how do these clinical internships and residencies relate to section 2570.4 of the OT Practice Act? Is the clinical internship residency fellowship considered practice by the doctoral students? And do these individuals need a license for services they render in the clinical internship residency fellowship? What impact is there, if any, if the doctoral program isn't accredited by ACO? These are questions that we developed. And we wanted to bring this to here because we put it on this agenda so that the professional associations could participate, and also the board could look at it further, of course.
If I may, in follow-up to the August meeting, if you go to the next page, one of the questions reflected in the minutes had to do with the status of the California schools. And so that information is contained in your materials. There's only been one change, and I noted that at the bottom. I guess we should have used page numbering, but Dominican is now in the applicant status, and as of the August meeting, they had not been. Other than that, the status of these programs is as of the 16th of October. Obviously, with the two state schools, I know why they're on there. I don't know what Stanbridge's intent is, but to the point that the statute says is specific to, it's not unlicensed practice if somebody is pursuing a program at an accredited program, and so we pose that issue of what is that 1 year of practice when the individual is not licensed and not a student in an accredited program.
So the issue is that previously fieldwork, the fieldwork students were limited. It was a time-limited fieldwork. Let's see, and the regs reflect that, or the Business and Professions Code reflects that. Now we talked last time about submitting letters to the programs. That was in the minutes.
Correct, and the thing that that was not done because I felt more information was needed. For example, there was discussion about the California schools. Well, the schools are noted, so there's this distinction between accredited, non-accredited, post-professional versus entry level. I just feel like staff really needed more direction in order to send the letter to the schools. What specifically? What are you wanting to find out from them?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we did need a little bit more. This also under the post-professional for Loma Linda and USC. Again, I'm not even sure if those are post-professional programs. I realized after I was going back and reading that I don't necessarily know that they are, and if they're. Is there a distinction between an entry-level doctoral program and a post-professional that the schools, that the board is wanting to make that emphasis to the schools? That's a sort of a more direction piece. So we will be happy to send a letter and report back to the board. I just need a little bit more clarification.
Okay. So, I mean, you've included here the relevant sections of BPC 2570.4 at the first page of this
Yes.
materials, and you've highlighted and the bolded are two relevant aspects of the code. Any person pursuing a supervised course of study leading to a degree or certificate in occupational therapy at an accredited educational program is this licensing. Well, the whole section, nothing in this chapter shall constitute as presenting or restricting the practice of a person who's in an accredited program under B or in a fieldwork experience according to the section 2570.6, and then when you get to 2570.6 on the opposite page, again, it refers to an accredited program, and there's no provision in the regulations or the law for someone who's in a not yet accredited program, nor is there a provision, isn't there also a time limit in here somewhere? Or was there not? No, there wasn't.
The only time limit is in point 4, and it's specific to out-of-state applicants, not students.
Oh, okay. So that was not relevant to this. Although we may have out-of-state doctoral students who are getting their experience in California, OTD students.
Could be.
Or
So,
Nevada or something.
President Bookwalter,
You will. Yeah, go ahead.
if we go back to the minutes just for a minute of August, I think maybe that's a starting point because we did have some specific asks in there, if that helps staff. I'm just wondering. For example, on page 3, item number 8. One of the comments that I specifically made as an ask is if we could go back to ACO and ask if whether they believe an unlicensed doctoral student can sign off on treatment or not. So do we know the answer to that?
No, we did not reach out to
Okay,
them.
so that would be one request for action. I think we all agree. My understanding of how this went, that was a very robust discussion. We had a really great one with the board on that, and my understanding is we did have some requests, so there was that. And then Jeff wanted clarification to make a condition that ACO cannot move forward with the credit until the loopholes are closed. So that's a call to action there too. Sharon also spoke about the board should assess where each school is, which I think you've done that for us. Thank you. And then and Richard identified that, and then it's further below that that Mr. Bookwalter suggested sending a definitive letter to the schools explaining the board's concerns. So I think I understand, I agree with Richard in wanting to send a letter, but I think we do have to go back and get some clarity from ACO. That might in turn, I don't know, maybe this is the timing on this is so important that it might result in a teleconference. I don't know. It would be, but if that's the case, it seems like we have to first start with ACO, get some questions answered, and then come back to the board so we can further populate that letter. Is that what I'm getting from these minutes?
I don't get that, because I mean, we had the motion to send, Jeff Farrow moved to send the letter to the California programs and to ACO notifying of the doctoral program issue, that these people, these, entry-level doctoral students may not be, my understanding was it would be these entry-level doctoral students, if they don't have their license when they're going into these fieldwork things and the program's not accredited yet, then that they would be, there's a licensing issue. I'm not sure ACO would have anything to say about that.
Do you mean post-professional or entry-level?
It would be entry-level, because post-professional people already have their license.
Then we
So they're
would
not
have,
unlicensed in their practice.
but
the
then
question
you're
was still
asking
that
us.
their doctoral program, not master's, that was an issue, correct, Heather?
Yes.
Okay.
So then we would have to come up with items, I think, now in further discussion in order for that letter to go out. Is that where?
Sounds like
Yes,
they need more.
that is exactly what I'm saying, because the we don't have enough information. I'm not really sure how to frame that, because when you distinguish between post-professional and entry-level, there's an assumption that the post-professional are being licensed, and I can tell you it's not happening.
Well, why don't we?
So that's what I'm saying. I personally, I'm troubled with the use of one of those descriptors before the doctoral because of the nature of this. And that's why I'm asking, we will send the letter to the schools, we'll send the letter to ACO. I need a little bit more direction in terms of that without inserting an assumption that they'll be licensed, because the issue came up because they're not.
So we don't really care if it's
So-
if they call themselves post-professional or not. What we care about is, are these people licensed according to our regs, or according to the law? Right?
Right.
So we can just send a letter. I mean, if we send a letter to all your programs, if you have any students in an unaccredited program, I mean, just inform them of the BPC code that, they have to be in an accredited program or licensed.
Shoot, just instead of rushing through this, is there something we should meet for a teleconference and then get some hard questions to send forward versus just, I don't know.
Well,
I
I
don't know if
want
it's
to
something I
ask.
want to rush through.
I agree. I want to ask something else though, Heather. You weren't in that meeting, so you didn't get to weigh in on the means. I recognize there's a motion, and I want to respect that. But is it as simple as, in your process, the board wants this info. Is it as simple as making a phone call to each of the program directors? Is that a direction? Because really what we're saying is, what does your doctoral students look like? Are they licensed? How do they? I mean, that's what you're really info gathering for us. Is that right? Is that correct? I mean, do you want to do it in a phone call versus a letter? Do you want us to amend the motion?
No. I mean, we can send a paper letter. I can even send a survey monkey and follow up with a phone call
There
if
you
somebody's
go.
a non-responder. I mean, I feel like whatever way of reaching out to them, I guess that was the whole thing, is that a letter was drafted. There was emphasis on this post-professional versus entry level, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily appropriate given the fact there are no accredited doctoral programs in this state. None.
Well, no,
I mean,
but-
you know, but schools are graduating folks with doctoral degrees. So
But Heather,
what does that mean?
post-professional masters or whatever, or doctorate, to me was always, somebody's already practicing an OT, so they probably have a license somewhere. Then they go back to school to get that extra degree. So maybe they had a bachelor's and they're going, post-professional typically is, the typical person who goes through that program is going to be somebody who has already been practicing and now they're getting, so they got a license and they're expanding, doing that. But you're saying that you don't know that that's the case.
I know that is not always happening. I
Okay.
do know that.
Because
I do know that folks are graduating with their master's in occupational therapy, and they are starting a doctoral program. They're taking and passing the exam, and this application for licensure is coming after they've already started that 1 year clinical residency fellowship, whatever you want to phrase it. And so that's why I'm just saying we need information to make sure that we're capturing the information that is important to the board, without me assuming that it's post-professional versus entry level or this licensure piece. I mean, that's why this matters before the board. Do you consider that unlicensed practice of a doctoral student who's doing a 1 year clinical, when they have graduated from a master's program and they've taken and passed the exam and haven't yet applied for a license? Is that unlicensed practice? That's sort of the springboard, and then there's more nuanced issues, you know.
Yeah, there was
relative
issues
to
of
that.
whether they were having a D next to their title on their, as a doctoral OT versus what they were actually passed and had as their, so if they had a master's, are they using the D now because they're in a D program because they think, I think that was part of it. But I think there was some discussions of people saying they could.
So I think we wanted, with the letter, we want to take an informational approach, Jeff? Correct
We
me if I'm
did,
wrong,
we
like
did, and I think it
asking
also
them
wanted to create, part of my
raise issues.
purpose, is to create a little pressure on both ACO and these universities that are rushing forward without having, clear understanding what that meant for regulations.
And was the letter
Licensure.
to ACO about what degrees of accreditation, what the steps of accreditation are, and where people.
I didn't bring my notes from the last meeting.
We know where they're at in the process, right? I mean,
Because that's 100%
that.
accurate. This is accurate.
As
Okay.
of the 16th, it's directly from AOTA's
Okay.
website,
Okay.
and the bold italic
Okay.
applicant program, developing programs, that is from AOTA's website,
And I
telling
think-
where those schools are at, and the italic part underneath it also.
Can I ask a public member a question, Richard?
Sure.
Chuck, can you tell us what other state license boards are doing in relation to these ACO standards? Do you have any?
Okay. So, and I'm trying to follow along in the conversation. I wasn't at the last meeting, but part of it might be that the Practice Act itself hasn't kept up with what we've done in education, right? The Practice Acts, from my experience, many of them have exemptions, and there's one in there for students on fieldwork or completion of an education program that's accredited. And that language doesn't capture what's happening here, where someone has finished their fieldwork, but now they're doing a capstone, or that the program is in candidacy status, right, under ACO and isn't fully accredited. I'd argue, I see what the statute says. It says accredited, but those states or those education programs that are in candidacy status under ACO, they can admit students. And by the time those students are about to graduate, it'll be fully accredited. So, that's the hope. I haven't seen one that hasn't turned out that way. So I think there's different parts to this. One is what's in the statute for the law. And I think we have some archaic language that hasn't kept up with how we're dealing with educational issues. The next piece is understanding the Aco process. Now, the first part of the process, the application process, they're developing, they're hiring faculty, they're building the program. They can't admit students. In order to admit students, they have to really meet some serious benchmarks, and then students can come in. As a student, are you going to go into a program that isn't likely to be accredited? No. So I think understanding that process and what it means to be in candidacy status is very important. I mean, the other side of this, you could argue, is if a program is accredited and there's a problem with their accreditation and they're like on, I don't know, supervision or under probation or something, or are they no longer accredited? So with that, I mean, I think you should have a conversation, you, the board, staff, with our director of accreditation at AOTA to number one, gather information from them, but two, explain, here's what we're seeing. When I heard you say unaccredited programs, I was trying to think of what that was. But really, I mean, these are programs that are about to be accredited by ACODE, and those students are, under agreements between facilities. I myself had an OTD student working for me. Now, it's not a practice setting, and it doesn't have to be, but there was an agreement between AOTA and the school, and there were specific provisions put in place about that person's experience and the outcomes and all these other things. So there's a framework here for these students, even though they are not in an accredited program, they're in an applicant program that is well on its way. So
who supervised that student?
In this case, it was me, and an occupational therapist.
Non-OT.
Right, and an OT.
But it was probably advocacy.
Yeah, it
That was
wasn't.
their track.
We're not providing services at the office, and
Right.
so it wasn't for that particular capstone project. An OT supervision was not required. Now, if we have an OT fieldwork student at the office, an OT is involved in providing that supervision. So
Did that student sign his or her name OT? With the OT
no,
suffix or anything?
no, because if I think from our perspective, if you're a student, you're an occupational therapy student. There is no OTS or those different things that are invented. So I think we're pretty strict on that. They're not licensed. They're not OTDs. They're not candidate OTDs. They're not there yet. So that is different than this discussion about post-professional. I think that's an important discussion as well, because my understanding, there's at least one school in California where you go through the entry-level master's and then you don't leave, right? You stay on campus or stay involved with the school and you get your post-professional. But my understanding is those folks, once they finish their entry-level master's, they get licensed, and then while they're pursuing their post-professional OTD, they're fully licensed. So if there are people that are going entry-level master's programs and then pursuing post-professional and not getting licensed, then that's wrong. They should have passed the exam. They should be licensed. They shouldn't be running around out there without a license, from our perspective.
Right. But we have people who just go straight through and into their entry-level doctorates. I think are more, to me, the entry-level doctorates are more of an issue because they go in all the way through and then they have their doctorate program. They still haven't got their license yet until after that. I think that's the population that we're looking at.
That wasn't what he just described there. One of those schools has them go from the master's, it's Bridge. That student graduated from the master's, got their license, went on to the OTD. I was her supervisor. She had her license when she was under me.
There are other schools that have a fast track, so you finish your master's, like in June, and you start right away into, you can wait, you don't have to get your license, you just start the fast track for your, if I'm understanding that correctly, your.
Well, I think some of this was driven by our enforcement team, and though you may say that our laws are behind, they are our laws. I mean, my car does 100 miles an hour. Our signs say maximum 65 or maybe 70. We may not like it, but that's the way the laws are. Until the laws are changed, I can't go 65 or 70. And so I don't want our enforcement team to be put in a spot because maybe some university or some student or whatever may be misunderstanding what they're allowed to do because we're changing to a doctoral program and they're trying to make sure that when a person calls in, they don't get any trouble. And I think that's where the genesis of our discussions were. I think there were some discussions about what was happening with our enforcement team and how do we deal with it, and what changes need to be made, or how do we either slow some folks down so that way there isn't this, the move for education or this move for new requirements within the associations or the industry don't get too far ahead of our students who are moving through, and then their first experience with the industry is they're cited for operating without a license or using a title that's not what they're allowed to use. And so, I mean, that was the discussion that was occurring when Heather wasn't there. And the reason for the letter, you know, making sure that we are providing the student this positive early experience, and two, that because they're unclear of what they can do based upon this change, we don't create some consumer protection issues by people operating without a license, or at least creating the perception for a patient that they're being treated by a licensed person and ultimately not being treated by a licensed person.
And it wasn't. And another thing is when we during the discussions about AB 2221, there was a meeting that we had with a Business and Professions Committee staff member who asked the board whether the board was interested in sort of about what, you know, to what degree our interest was in regulating education programs, which is not a statutory part of our statutory authority. So we're not here to replace ACODE or to tell ACODE what to do in that way. But we are here, you know, we do have to look at this, that where's the line between, I mean, if a program is not accredited, but it's somewhere in the process, but these people are providing OT services and they're not licensed, you know, we have to figure out where it is that the regulations should kick in. And so I think that's where we were coming from with getting information from the schools,
Heather,
programs, and maybe from ACODE as well.
Heather, based on the suggestion that Chuck made, I'm trying to get to the action. The suggestion that Chuck made about speaking with the director, AOTA, director of accreditation, is that a first step that you would find necessary, or have you?
No, I can do
Is that the direction you want to go first?
We could do both.
Do you want to do both? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can certainly have a conversation, and that will probably help me formulate a letter.
Great.
So I will do that.
Can I provide additional information for the CSUs where we're at with this? Ivan, since he's not here, provided an update because Capital Advocacy also represents them. They are still in the process of having their internal discussions and data gathering to determine, the necessity versus the demand in order to offer the OTD programs, because they would have to introduce a bill for that. Mm-hmm. So they are still in conversations, and so there's not a definite answer in regards to the CSU programs.
Well, and there's one more wrinkle too.
Is that the Cal States?
If some of the master's program may be accredited, but the OTD program is not. Mm-hmm. And is there a pathway for
that was a big part of our discussion
through the master's program for the field work?
Yeah.
That's a gray area too, because our law says accredited programs. Part of the program is accredited, part of it's not. Where does the status of the students within the OTD students within that program? I think that was a distinction.
That was part of our discussion. Yeah.
We wanted to include in the letter to the education program.
To ACODE or to the California schools?
Both.
Well, I guess you could make there's two different questions you would ask from each of them. ACODE, you would ask,
are they concerned that their new standards with this creating a problem? They need to be part of ours.
It's not their problem though; it's our problem because of our law. So.
Well, are the new
it's really the
standards?
school. It seems to me the schools.
Okay.
Are the new standards on hiatus? We were supposed to get one in August, and then did they finally come up with the new standards in September, October?
The standards have been finalized, but in terms of implementation, I mean, that's a little further out.
Yeah, we were waiting for them for a while. They got pushed back to like October.
I think the new
ones are out now.
Standards are out.
Okay.
But our intent is not to prevent students from getting educated or people from being out there. We just want somebody to be looking after them. If they're not in an accredited program, if they're not licensed, if they're providing services to the consumer and protecting that, the consumer's not protected. If they're not licensed and they're not supervised under our law.
Okay, so
An accredited program.
Let's see. Again, I mean, we are saying not accredited, but they are under the guise of ACODE in that ACODE has vetted their application and they're at a point where they can admit students and they are on a pathway to be fully accredited. So, I mean, these aren't fly-by-night educational organizations. These are, bona fide programs that are just about to be fully accredited. So there is, again, an agreement between the facility and the program that's guiding, what these students are doing. That's part one. Part two is, let's say that these students are unlicensed. There's no pathway for them to get licensed, because in order to get licensed, you have to complete your program and pass the NBCOT exam. Well, you can't pass the NBCOT exam until you complete your program. So they'd be in a catch-22. They're not licensed, but there's no way for them to get licensed.
Well, there is. If they are licensed under the master's program, and that before they get, if they're licensed because they complete the master's level training before they go into the doctoral program, then there's no problem. And the thing is,
yes,
so let's say that we agree, let's say that the board decided that we were going to tweak our regulations to allow for a lesser level of accreditation from Aco, some letter of agreement. We put in a clause for that. Even if we did that, which we haven't decided to do, and we may not want to do, but even if we decided today to do that, it would be 18 months to 2 years before that enters the regulation. So in the meantime, we're going to have 18 months to 2 years of these students who are not in non-accredited programs unless they become accredited during that time, potentially practicing outside the licensing structure, and that's a problem. So there needs to be a mechanism before that for the schools, for the students to be in compliance, or else they're out of compliance, right?
Okay.
That's the problem that we have.
Okay, so I understand.
The law is the law.
And again, gathering a little bit more information, I think would be helpful. But also looking at BPC 2570.4, I mean, I see B, but does provision C have any help here? Any person fulfilling the supervised fieldwork experience requirements of this section, if the experience constitutes part of the experience necessary to meet the requirements of that provision. I mean,
look at the next page, and you'll see.
Then there's the reference to the accreditation, and that's the piece that's missing.
There's another reference to accreditation. So unfortunately, for the argument that you're making,
Doesn't fix it.
it says accredited in both places.
well, I would take issue about how we're interpreting accreditation. I mean, again, a program that has applied and has recognition from ACOT as an applicant program is a level of accreditation. I just, and if we have to go back and change the statute, I suppose we'll have to. But, I think understanding from ACOT what does it mean to be in the applicant status and how stringent that is, I think is important to this discussion.
Then I would urge you to look at the following page, Status of California OT Programs, which is taken from the AOTA website.
Right.
Accredited California entry level OT programs. No.
Well, not only that, there's only 5 of the schools that are actually in the application process. I mean, so there are other schools that are still issuing doctoral degrees and graduating doctoral students who haven't started the accreditation process.
It says no California programs under accredited, so
Right. Well, they're in the.
so it's not accredited.
Process.
They're in the okay. So the developing programs can't admit students, right? But the applicant programs, I believe, can.
Right.
Oh,
So
wait, well,
so this is where we need.
Reverse.
candidacy status.
So this is where we probably need a letter of inquiry
What
to
are we talking about
ACOT
then?
around what the requirements are for each level,
Okay.
just to inform the board, and
I'm still confused.
and then a letter to the school, to the education programs, asking them whether they have students in field work who are in the unaccredited program who are not licensed. How many they have, maybe.
Can I ask a question, because I guess I'm a little confused, just for a little bit more clarification of this. So is the question or the issue that's coming before is that we've got students that are saying that they're using the initials OTD because they're in the doctorate program, but they haven't they are the ones that haven't passed the NBCOT from their master's level. Is that,
Yes,
am I interpreting this
that's
correctly?
exactly right.
Or are they're using different labels, like I'm a doctoral researcher, I'm a doctoral student, I'm completing my residency for my doctoral. I mean, there's these descriptions. I'm not necessarily saying that they're calling themselves occupational therapists. I'm not saying that.
Or they're developing,
But-
they're doing program development in some area, mental health
So
program or
maybe the
something.
supervision is a piece, like I would
So-
need more instruction.
Okay,
on
so
that.
then I have another question. If none of these programs can admit students, then what program are we talking about? Are we talking about post-professional programs? If none are in candidacy status, then
Well, our
where are
law
these
does not say programs that are in developing programs under the ACO standards. It doesn't say applicant programs under the
I
ACO
understand.
standards. It says accredited programs under the ACO standards, which is the problem.
Well, it also doesn't distinguish between entry level and post-professional either. And I think
Right.
that there's been that assumption that because an individual completed the master's degree as their entry level education, there's an assumption perhaps that those folks are getting licensed before they begin their doctoral, clinical, and it's not always happening.
That would be a solution. One potential solution is if before they go out on a doctoral program development project, they had the student had the license.
In order to represent themselves as a true occupational therapist. So
Correct.
that essentially, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is answered under section 7, so 2570.18B, where unless licensed to practice as an occupational therapist under this chapter, a person may not use the professional abbreviations OT, OTL, or OTD, occupational therapist license, occupational therapist doctorate, or any other words, letters, or symbols with the intent to represent the person practices or is authorized to practice occupational therapy. So doesn't that essentially answer the issue that's like you can't use OTD unless you actually are licensed as an OT.
Yeah, that's well, that's a level of education earned, which is yeah. So I don't know. So
I mean, OTS was something that we used when I was an education student, and I was in an accredited program, and I was supervised. So,
But then
I think many of us did.
C goes on with that. So when you talk about the education learned, a licensee who has earned a doctoral degree in occupational therapy OTD, or after the adoption of the regulations described in subdivision E, a doctoral degree in the related area of practice or study, may do the following, and then it goes.
we're talking about students.
Well, they have occupational therapist doctoral candidates. Some people will sign their name. You know, there's a certain amount of creativity in PhD candidate or OTD candidate.
So in my letter to Aco and the
don't
California programs, then I guess how would I frame the question regarding the supervision of the students in the doctoral program?
Well, I think you need to. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to alert the programs to the potential for unlicensed practice
Okay.
because of this regulation.
Okay.
Isn't that right? And ask them. I do think that we should ask for some kind of response. What kind of response do they? I mean, we can ask them if they have students who fit into this category, and how they work around it or something. I mean, I don't know.
What are they
Okay.
doing?
What are they telling?
Okay.
okay, so
Can I
sorry,
ask-
I'm still confused. Which schools will you send it to? If there are no schools in California that are admitting OTD students, then who would you send the letter to?
Well, we're not saying that there's no they're unaccredited. There are 5 unaccredited schools who are.
Okay, yes.
With
but
unaccredited
developing
OTD
programs and
programs.
applicant programs can't accept students. Only candidacy programs can. So if there's no candidacy programs, then they're going to say, well, we don't have any students. I don't understand.
But I
where
know
this
that
is
there
coming
are OTD students doing projects in California. So where are they coming from?
Are you talking like the USC ones?
USC's program is not accredited. Their OTD program is not accredited, right?
post-professional.
Right, I think the difference is that you're interpreting that in process counts them as accredited programs. And we're saying that our regs don't allow us to say, one day you will become accredited, and therefore you can be telling people.
Or maybe
they're in
not.
the-
Maybe you're right. Maybe but we've heard of students who are not licensed.
What, can I ask Jeff a question about what the experience they've been having and the challenges and dealing with that? Can
I
I?
think this originally came up primarily out of post-professional programs.
Because you still don't feel.
USC is where we had a problem with a student. But that's where I see it. It's now interesting to discuss whether or not, this process of somebody being a candidate and enrolling students, that really wasn't part of it. But I mean, I guess it all does need to be discussed now. But primarily it was derived out of the program. But one thing I would like to ask, for an accredited or Serena, for an accredited OTD program, would that have 3 fieldworks in it? Would it have a fieldwork 1, fieldwork 2, and also then the, I don't know, they call it residency, or is that what is encompassed in those programs?
Yeah, with fieldwork 1 and 2, and then a capstone doctoral experience. I mean, in fieldwork, I think there's 3. So yeah.
So of course we wouldn't have a problem with anybody that would. I mean, once they are accredited in a program like that, those students would fall under the exemption law. It's clear that would be an accredited program. So in my view, this is primarily about the post-professional programs.
I mean, obviously, if it was accredited, it wouldn't be an issue. So, but that's the issue that we have. So, I mean, it seems like
There's also not a distinction between entry level and post-professional.
Right.
Still, the only thing the law says is accredited. And it mentions doctoral degrees, and there's specifics about once the education is completed. So
Well, but in some ways that's helpful, right? Because ACO doesn't accredit post-professional programs. So those folks that are in post-professional programs don't have any cover. If you get your OT degree, master's, whatever, and then you go to the post-professional program, you better have a license. You got to stop, pass the exam, and get licensed. Those people that are in post-professional that skipped a step should be in trouble.
do we want the practice committee to help draft a letter, a couple of letters, since it's kind of a complicated issue, and then and get some more information first from ACO about the
I could
different
reach
levels?
out to ACO first before I reach out to the schools, because I feel like the information I get from ACO will be helpful in crafting a letter for the California schools.
And
Also finding out the information about the actual accreditation process and the time frame, so that I can bring that back to report to you all.
yeah,
That would be good.
Okay.
does that make sense?
Thank you.
Do you think?
So I will report on this at the next meeting.
Because then it'll be a better outreach. Because we don't want to be heavy-handed, or
No.
See how gently you carry those bugs away,
it's a problem to solve. And maybe by the February meeting, all the programs will be accredited, and then we won't have to worry. The issue will go away.
Or the special meeting in December.
And I don't think that'll happen. They might be accredited before we could get a new regulation through, however. That's an issue. Although there could always be, obviously there will always be new programs.
Emergency. We can do emergency regs.
Does the board have any
days
further
after passage.
discussion about that? So we'll just direct that. Do we need a motion to send that to
Sure,
the
because
practice committee?
Consumer health issues.
I
We
don't
could do
think
emergency regs.
anyone had desire for that,
And
so
then we could
I'll
sign when we go
start
back.
with ACO and I'll report back at the next meeting.
Great, thank you.
Also, when we were talking about items, I forgot we need to revisit item 7, which was the August 23rd meeting minutes.
Oh, that's right. We had one meeting minute thing that we wanted to check on.
So on page 14 of item 7, there was, in the middle of the page, there was a motion and a second. It both says by Denise Miller. Denise Miller did make the motion, but it was Beata who seconded the motion. So as a follow-up from yesterday.
Great. Thank you. You're doing double duty there, Denise.
So,
She ate her Snickers bar.
So shall we have a motion to,
I make a motion that we accept the August 23rd and 24th board meeting with the correction and as stated.
I second.
we have a motion by Denise, a second by Sharon. Any board discussion? Hearing none. Any public comment? Hearing none.
Sharon?
Yes.
Beata? Yes. Denise?
Yes.
Laura? I don't think I can vote because I wasn't here that day, right?
You may abstain.
I'll abstain. Jeff?
I was here half of it, so I'm gonna say yes.
Richard?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you for remembering that. She keeps us on track.
Okay, the dates? Is that
Suggested
right?
items for a future meeting, number 25.
We gotta go back and do 16 still.
We already talked about that.
Well, I want to just raise one issue. The NBCOT, bless you, fall regulatory newsletter came out, and I wanted to point out something real quickly here, that 51 jurisdictions have no limits on the number of times a candidate can attempt to pass the NBCOT exam. Says which states no information was found. 6 states have regulations indicating conditional requirements after multiple attempts. I wanted to raise this issue to the board to see if they wanted it to be a future agenda item, because if an individual is failing between 5 and 7 times, when they do pass, it's about 2 years after they graduated. I don't know if this board is concerned about this or not. I just wanted to raise the issue, and if you do think it's an issue, we can put it on the future agenda, and if not, that's fine. I've shared this information.
Let's put it on the future agenda.
I'm okay with it. I don't want it on the agenda.
You don't?
I know,
Okay.
You don't?
You have one.
I mean, I'm in education. I know all the back factors on why it takes. I mean, there's so many different factors.
I actually agree with you, but I think it's a good discussion.
No, we could have it.
I mean,
just
we can
took
at
a
least,
pulse.
but I agree,
Yeah.
I agree with you. We don't know how different people learn, but yeah, we could have it, because it'll be interesting to hear about the process.
Okay.
Other people, you want
I'm fine with that.
to discuss it?
Yeah, I don't have a problem discussing.
Okay, so it sounds like we have enough people that we should put it on the agenda.
Okay.
To discuss. All right, any other items, suggested items for a future meeting? We already gave the, okay, we have a public comment.
Oh, so, is it appropriate?
Yeah.
So I wanted to request a future agenda item. AOTA is developing a new professional development activity. We're going to be announcing it in December, and we'll send you information about it. But essentially, it's a new knowledge and skill, evidence-based knowledge and skills assessment. And it's going to be an online tool available to members and non-members at no cost. And so at a future meeting of the board, we'd like to come back and tell the board about it. We will be offering contact hours for this, and we want to see if that would be something that would qualify under your regulations. We're actually going to be limiting the amount of contact hours per year that someone could access. It's going to be limited to 3 per year. Our view is that knowledge and skills assessment should be one of many things that are done for continuing competence requirements. So the name of the product is called AOTA Benchmark, coming soon. And we anticipate sending out a letter to all the boards in December to announce it, but would like to get in the queue to come back and talk more about it in 2019.
Thank you.
Question?
Exciting.
Great.
And we'd like to help you get out of Washington DC in February, so.
Yes, the weather's much nicer here.
We also talked yesterday about license portability.
Well,
There
let's
were-
just to get back to this, I think we should add this to the agenda because we also,
Oh.
it's similar along the same lines of the NBCOT, so we'll put that on the agenda. I think.
Great. We also talked about license portability yesterday. We had some follow-up
Okay.
questions around that. You have those? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, any other items for a future agenda? Hearing none, let us move on to the selection of 2019 meeting dates under item 15. There's a calendar with some blackouts on it related to conferences and such. Now, we talked a little bit about this at our last meeting, but we only had 4 out of 6 people there, so we thought it would be better if more people were here. One of the concerns also is we talked about perhaps having Southern California meetings earlier in the year. We have to have one meeting in the Los Angeles area, one in San Francisco, one in Sacramento, and then additional meetings. We've traditionally attached a meeting in the last few years, thanks to Denise's leadership. We've been adding a meeting to the conference time, which has worked out well. But if that's our Los Angeles area meeting, it wouldn't be at the beginning of the year, because again, the conference is in Southern California, is here again next year, as it has been for a number of years now. I would like to see it in Northern California, but yeah, but there are issues. So
May I ask a question
there is a
around
spring
that?
symposium. We could attach it to the spring symposium in San Diego. Yes.
In, no, but is the Los Angeles meeting?
No is not a question.
Well, no, I wouldn't attach it to the OTAC if you're trying to take the pulse. It's yeah. But the question I have is the Los Angeles meeting in the beginning of the year, is it have to be LA or can it be Southern California? And I think we had that discussion. If I may, Beata, would you weigh in on this the most? Because I think
Southern California would be fine. Like anywhere, I can drive. Even San Diego would be nice. So Inland Empire, San Diego,
Doesn't
LA
We do
area.
University of St. Augustine, maybe in February.
If I remember, we looked at the regs before and it specified Los Angeles area.
well, but Jeff, we have 3 in the regs and we have 4 meetings.
Right.
So that fourth
Or
meeting can be
6.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Get
that's
it?
right, which we've been doing St. Augustine or San Diego before.
Heather, didn't you mention something about Carson?
Yeah, that was Heather
Oh,
Kitching.
CSU Dominguez Hills
No. Yeah, Heather.
is in Carson, yes.
I've never been there. That would be nice.
I'm leaving in
Right by the
5
Honda
minutes.
Center.
Something different.
I have to.
Where is
I'm
it?
sorry.
It's right at
Next to it.
If you have to, you have to.
No, it's not Carson City.
Oh,
okay.
That's Carson City, Nevada.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
So we could just set up a first meeting and again push this off yet again to that meeting. If we want to meet in February somewhere in Southern California, and then we could discuss future meeting dates at that time.
Can you tell me what weeks we normally meet? Did you notice if there's a trend?
It's usually February, March, one or the other, and then plus 3 months each.
No, I meant the time. Like in February, isn't it usually like that? Like for example, would it be the 14th, 15th? Well, that's
No,
not going to work for
14th.
people.
14th isn't ever it. It's always
Would
the
it be the
second
7th, 8th?
Or the beginning of March.
Okay, so or the 21st,
7th, 8th
22nd.
is fine with me.
Oh,
It's earlier in the year, which is nice, so we get started a little earlier.
Or the 21st, 22nd. Whatever
I think is that President's Week?
that is.
So,
So
you don't want to do that, I think.
7th, 8th, and that.
Flights.
Okay, and then the next, does that mean if the next one, would that have to be in April or would that go out to May?
May.
Well, we have it in May, June anyway, so we can have it in the beginning of March.
We also have strategic planning to do,
Well,
which
that's,
is.
we're gonna squeeze that in at the end of the year, I think.
You want to do end of year? Okay, because that's with the fact we didn't have, because we didn't have you last time, we
Yes.
weren't sure. Last time we did it, it was in June, July or something, June, July, so, but the end of year is,
So if we went to May, what are we looking at, the 23rd, 24th? What-
Did we decide something for February?
Not, we haven't, we haven't,
Okay.
we
I
haven't.
skipped, okay.
but didn't,
I'm just trying to move the conversation along because I unfortunately,
Well, I would move it back to the 16th, 17th, and not do it in conjunction with that May 3-day weekend. I think that,
or else the
Which
9th, 10th, it could be to be consistent with Feb.
or if we want to do
No,
February
no, no.
7th and 8th, we could just meet then and go through the rest of the year since you have to leave now.
So President's
Well, I
Day.
think we can get
President's
through
Day is
this.
the
I think we
18th.
can get through this.
Monday the
It
18th
never takes
of
us long.
February. President's Day is the 18th of February.
That's
So you
right.
do have the 22nd, the 21st, 22nd if you wanted.
7th and 8th was better.
yeah, I think so.
7th and 8th is going to work better.
Okay.
So we all agree on
Does-
February 7th?
It's not going to work for you?
Probably not. I mean, later on or the beginning of March would be better.
Beata, I don't think we can go that late. That would be That would be November,
So
December,
actually 7 and 8 might be.
What about the
Yeah.
28th
Or
and the
28th and the
1st?
first.
No.
We could do the 28th and the first.
Hold on, let me just double check here. 7 and 8 would be, if it's like nearby LA, like if it's Carson, I can do 7 or 8. Or
Okay.
7 and 8.
I think it would be, but not San Diego.
Probably not. But I might be able to make that happen. So if it has to be San Diego, I can.
Would the 28th and the first be better or not? Not really. Doesn't matter. So
That would be even worse.
why don't we do the 7th and 8th and get started early, and then we'll see. We'll try to make it.
7, 8 is good.
Okay, February 7 and 8.
7 and 8's good. Then we're looking at May, early May.
9, 10, just to keep consistent. It's far enough out from AOTA for me, my employer won't get mad.
We have to celebrate Mother's Day for Mexico on the 10th.
So we'll work. We'll just have to play
Yeah,
it by
we
ear.
Just realize that we may not have a lot of participation from our Latino members.
Heather's proposing that we just do those two, and if
What two?
7th and 8th of February,
Okay.
and the 9th and 10th of May, and then on the 7th and 8th on the agenda, we can discuss the rest of the year and strategic planning. Because people have to go, other people have to go to the airport as well, and now
Okay.
it's probably better.
And we
to-
still have the election of
March and May,
officers.
what?
we still have election of officers. Do we have agreement to pick those two sets of dates
Yeah,
and then
19th.
get the election
Could
of
I
officers?
also make a suggestion?
If it's, yeah.
Do we have to wait so far out? This is not, can we email our suggestions either to the board president, executive director, email our and then
I can
get,
send a doodle out.
yeah, do,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, do that.
all right.
Because that way we can get it on the calendar. you know, the whole
yeah.
year.
And then the suggestions for the locations, is that possible? The order of the locations, is that okay?
We can
Thank
set it
you.
up that way.
Go to San Diego to Comic-Con.
Then we can all be looking at our calendars and making our,
The election of officers. Oh wait, 16 selection of strategic plan we're moving out to. It's 26, so we're skipping 16 to moving that to February. 26 election of officers. It is that time of year to elect officers for 2019.
I make a motion that we keep the existing officers if they so accept.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
do you accept?
Board comment. I accept.
Do you accept, Sharon?
Yeah.
Do you accept?
Absolutely.
Call the vote?
Any other board comment?
Okay.
Oh, public comment. Sorry. Do you have any objection to our slate of officers?
All right.
Thank you.
Sharon?
Yes.
Beata?
Yes.
Denise?
Yes.
Me? Yes. Jeff?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes. Motion carries.
Now we
Congratulations to our new officers.
We're gonna do it. They said they're moving it to the February meeting because we're not gonna do it. till the
Motion
end
to
of the year.
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn is in order. Yes, I'll motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned.